here from Boston. I teach at the Boston School of Herbal Studies. I'm a landscape architect, and I design gardens. And about 10 years into my practice, I was trying to figure out what about my work was going to sustain me, because I didn't think just taking beautiful pictures of gardens was going to do it for me forever. And what I realized was that when my clients were calling me up and feeling very engaged with their landscapes, and oh my God, the blueberries are blooming, and we just picked them for our morning breakfast cereal. When there was that level of engagement, that's when I really felt like what I was doing was kind of giving back to me in a way that could sustain me. So I changed my practice over to a more edible-based practice. I don't really do vegetable gardens, but ornamental landscapes with nuts and berries and other foraged foods. And then I got Lyme disease, and I became really sick, and I went on a herbal path to wellness. And I had 2 children, and at that point I just determined that I really needed to become an herbalist and learn how to take care of myself and my family, because a lot of times the allopathic method, whenever we would try to go that route, it seemed like we got sicker. So I became an herbalist, and what I loved about this process was I've always loved plants. I identified my first wildflower when I was 9 years old, in the Albion Basin, and just have always been, worked in a nursery, did botanical illustration for a while, took botany courses where we traveled all up and down the Wasatch Front in Utah, where I'm from, looking at different habitats. And that's when I started to realize that there are certain plants that are generalists, and they'll really live anywhere, and you see them almost anywhere. And there are other plants that are really specific about where they want to live. And that was my first exposure to that, and I kind of started thinking about that. Then I did my degree in landscape architecture, and I worked for a lot of landscape architecture firms. I did some interesting work. And then I went back to the design school at Harvard, and I did my master's degree, and I worked and taught with Richard Foreman, who's the preeminent ecologist, kind of wrote the book. And I really started to understand ecological systems and how systems really rule our life on the planet, our own physiological systems, the systems, hydrological systems, landscape systems. So, I did that for a while, and then I started my practice. And like I said, I got Lyme disease and decided to become an herbalist. And at that point, I was at the herb school, and I saw everyone around me, all of my colleagues and friends, really struggling. They didn't have the 20 years of botany background that I had had. And when you're a beginning herbalist, you're learning so many things. You're learning physiology and dosage and how to diagnose and how to harvest and make your own medicine. And it's very difficult to assimilate all of that information in what's typically a 2-year program. So I started to devise a course of study that would help my friends, my herbal friends, to learn the botanical material better, so that they could identify the plants in the field more readily and gather their own medicine instead of purchasing it. Because I'm also a locavore. I love food foraging. I'm totally into that. And it just seemed silly that we were buying our medicine from these far-flung places instead of gathering the foods that we're growing right in our own environments. So couple that with my need to help people engage with their landscape, and you have the reason for this talk. So that was kind of a long introduction, but I think it's helpful to have the background for why I want to talk about this. Do you think? Okay. Well, it's spinning. The computer's a little bit, just can't think. So this is how I want to break this down. There's basically several habitats, and the thesis of this, and I want you to think about this like it's a framework for thinking. It's a framework for helping you as a new herbalist or an old herbalist even remember information. So I'm going to give you a bunch of habitats, and the basic thesis is that a plant does the same thing in the landscape, in a landscape system, that it does in the body. So if you understand where it's from and what it's doing in the landscape and what its essence, its core vibrational energy, if you will, is, then it can help you deduce really important information about how to use it in the body. So for some people, this method is going to be more confusing because you may not know anything about landscapes yet. But for some people who have grown up in different landscapes or can kind of or they have sort of a generalized way of thinking or lateral thinking, this is a very helpful tool. So I am definitely a lateral thinker and want to collate information and bring it together and group it. And I find that helpful when I'm learning information rather than dividing into smaller bits. So since we're in New York City, we should probably talk about an urban environment. So what do we know about urban environments? What's common about an urban environment? Come on.
A lot of soil compaction.
Soil compaction. Anytime you have a root zone, you probably have something impermeable over it. A sidewalk, a road, a building. What else?
Not a lot of sunlight.
Sunlight is in demand. Not a lot of humidity either. What else?
Additional pollution.
Air pollution, big time, yeah. And you know, the flashy streams, the flashy rainstorms will come down because of all these impermeable surfaces and will wash all of those particulates into this small root zone. So it's very concentrated kind of, you know, we know that about urban environments. So there's a few other things, but you guys hit on the main ones. So there are plants that grow in an urban environment that aren't necessarily planted there. And I'd really like to show you the pictures of them, but I'm going to just start describing the first one, Japanese knotweed. Does anybody know this plant? Yeah? So what do you know about Japanese knotweed?
It has a very deep root system.
Yeah.
It flowers and seeds prolifically also. They grow 6-8 feet tall.
Tenacious, right?
Yeah.
Very difficult to get rid of. Will grow almost anywhere, particularly disturbed areas or compacted areas. It's Wildman Steve Brill, who's a big food forager, found some in the Bronx City Park near here that was 13 feet high and very healthy. When it's very young, you know, 6 to 8 inches, it's bright pink. It looks like rhubarb. It tastes like rhubarb. It acts like rhubarb a little bit in the body. It's a laxative, clearing and cleaning. It's very, very high in something I'm sure you've all heard of called resveratrol. I mean, red wine, people have heard of this, right? And a major antioxidant. Resveratrol has been shown to diminish the effects of and slow the process of Alzheimer's, similar to what Richard was talking about with mushrooms. And, you know, it's just interesting to me that here's this plant growing in this urban environment, helps us with these chronic stress, these issues with chronic stress like that we would get. Resveratrol is specific for stresses on the body that have to do with free radicals and not the body not being able to deal with those kinds of stresses. I really want to be able to show you these slides. I'm gonna keep going. So that was I'll show you a slide of those of Japanese knotweed if we get it up. There's another few plants that grow, and I'll just do these quickly. Another few plants that grow in urban environments and fairly readily almost anywhere. One of those is dandelion. Another is plantain. And another is garlic mustard. So all of these plants are very nutritionally rich. They have higher vitamin A, B complex, C, and D levels than most other wild food foraged plants. So the way they help us, you know, is that they deeply nourish. They also have, dandelion's one of the highest in the, I want to say potassium, iron, and zinc. So, and that's because of that tap root again. It mines the very deep soil and brings those minerals that are deeper in the soil up into the higher levels of the soil. For all the plants to use, actually, you know, yeah.
That's a good question. In an urban environment where the soil is filled what's to say that those minerals are gonna be there?
They may not. I think so. I'm not necessarily suggesting that these plants that are growing in your urban environment are the ones that you should go and harvest. But it's a learning tool. It's a way of saying, wow, this is a plant that is creating polyphenols like resveratrol in order to protect itself from the very same stresses that we're also dealing with. When we take those into our bodies, we benefit from them. It's just like essential oils, the sheen on the surface of a leaf. Those are the plant's immune system, and when we take those, even in very small amounts, we gain some of those same benefits. So, and I would always use your judgment. Like, there may be a plot somewhere that you know of that you feel good about harvesting from, and I think everyone should use their judgment. And I'm also not saying never harvest in the city either. I think there are places where you can safely harvest. So.
I think we just need to use the computer because it looks like it froze.
Okay. So we'll just use the computer screen? Oh,
Yeah,
no.
just against that thing. So I'm just gonna
Restart. Okay. So everybody knows what dandelion looks like. I'm not going to talk too much more about that one. Do people know about garlic mustard? Like how towns have these garlic mustard pulls to get rid of it because it has allelopathic compounds that kill mycorrhizal fungi in the soil so that tree seedlings don't take as well. So they become these monocultures, and in the forest, on the forest edges, it makes it harder for the native species to grow up. But again, it's a very tenacious plant, and it's really tough to get rid of. So often these towns will end up having like garlic mustard pesto festivals instead of pole festivals, to use it as food. So again, very rich. One of the things to say about this one is it's very high in sulforaphane, which is a sulfur compound that it's like the third highest mineral in the body. We need it for our Krebs cycle to work properly. So again, it's this deep nourishment. It's like this micro-nourishment that we have to have in order for everything to work properly. Like mitochondria of the cell, which is the engine of the cell, uses sulfur to power itself, like as its fuel. So it's critical that we get enough brassica. Garlic mustard is in the mustard family, the brassica family, also called cruciferous vegetables, the kales, the cauliflowers, the cabbages, kohlrabi, all of those are in that family. We need to eat those every day to keep our Krebs cycle really highly, tuned. And then plantain, plantain is one of those plants that is like the gateway herb for herbalists. It's sort of like, I teach all the little kids this one. They can recognize it immediately, and it's everywhere, it's super effective, and it's very safe. So it's a great one to start with, and it's good for wounds and bee stings, and it's just like first aid. It's like something you can use all the time. And I've definitely been in New York and been stung by a bee and found some plantain in a park, and I was definitely nervous about like pets, so I took my water bottle out, washed it off, and you just macerate it and put it on the wound, and you don't know you had a bee sting 3 minutes later. But if you didn't do that, you'd still be feeling the formic acid 3 hours later. So it's extremely effective. We're trying to get this working. I don't know if you can help. So the next, that was kind of I've spent a long time on the urban habitat because we're in an urban habitat, and I think it's helpful to do that. But let's talk about some habitats that have been around a little bit longer, like riparian and wetland habitats. Do people know what those are? Like, give me some characteristics of a wetland habitat. Wet soils. Plants have to be adapted for wet soils. That's not a small feat for plants. They need air in the soil. Most roots need air. So these wetland plants are specifically adapted for that. And what happens in a wetland? What is a wetland's purpose? Anybody?
There's a lot of nitrogen and phosphorus pulled out of the water.
The plants filter the water, and the water that goes into a wetland is far dirtier than when it comes out. It's about filtration. So if you think of the wetland of the body, the kidneys, the urinary tract, in women, the uterus, the lower bowels, the plants that we get from wetlands, we often use in the wetland of the body. And they're about fluid regulation, just like in a wetland. So you'll see, oh, wow, bravo! All right, so okay. So here's some wetland plants. This is boneset, and these are both eupatoriums. Boneset up there, Eupatorium perfoliatum, Eupatorium purpureum. This is the plant that grows near me on the land that I live on that kind of sparked me to think about plants in this way. When I pulled this plant up to harvest it for medicine, I pulled the roots up out of the muck and kind of rinsed them off in the water. And it looks like a mass of curly black hair with like tiny little bits of gravel stuck in the roots. And the Native Americans called this gravel root because it was specific for kidney stones, for gravel in the body. And it does the same thing in the wetland. It's like a language. It's kind of like a doctrine of signatures kind of thing. It's like you pull it up, it's like, oh, that's what that's for. It's so obvious. This one, Eupatorium purpureum, Joe Pye weed, gravel root, this plant. And those are both eupatoriums. They're both used for using the fluids of the body to clear toxins. So the top one was used for colds and influenza, and this was the early influenzas, the ones that caused massive diarrhea and problems with fluids. So this plant would cause sweating, which is a way of purging, right, using the fluids of the body.
What's the name of that?
Boneset, Eupatorium perfoliatum. It's not used that much anymore, but it's a great plant for illustrating this concept. It's very strong, so to take it in a tincture form or something is like it's very purgative, like it's an emetic if you take it in high doses. This was given as a tea, as a very dilute tea, 8 ounces, warm, over time, while the patient rested. So it's a slow acting, very much like a wetland. Water moves very slowly through a wetland and it gets cleansed very slowly. But it's effective. I want to talk about willow and meadowsweet. Both of these, I don't have a picture of meadowsweet, but there's the willow here. These are both plants that grow in wetlands, and they both have a compound, which I'm sure you're familiar with, salicylic acid, which is now the component that's been synthesized in labs to make non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs or things like aspirin. These are drugs that have a really strong effect on the gastric system when they're taken in the drug form. When we look at the compounds that are available in these plants, there's like 200 or more other compounds besides salicylic acid in both meadowsweet and willow that are buffering to the stomach and to the entire wetland of the body. They're very softening and moistening and cooling like a wetland in the body. And I'm going to leave it at that because I don't want to run out of time. There's so much to say about that. This is calamus root. This is an incredibly powerful remedy for someone who is going through drug withdrawal. When someone's going through drug withdrawal, there's often a lot of gastric distress because of the way that this. I don't want to go too much into the science of it, but the way the cell transfers potassium ions and sodium chloride, and it's all about fluid retention. And this plant regulates that so that drug withdrawal is not as devastatingly difficult on the body.
Sorry, the name?
Calamus root, Acorus calamus, or calamus root. This is not a beginner's herb. This is a very toxic and strong remedy, but it illustrates this point of fluid management really well. This is an ancient plant, horsetail, Equisetum arvens. And if you've ever spent any time in a wetland and seen how this plant grows, it does this amazing thing. It grows right in the muckiest part of the water, and the water comes into it, and it immediately slows down, and all the sediment drops right to the roots of this plant. And this is a very interesting plant chemically. It's different from most other plants. It's very high in silica, very nutritionally rich. It's super rigid, and it doesn't really taste like much in a tea. So it's a really great addition to any herbal tea that you're making, because silica is what we need for all of our connective tissues. And that's not just like ligaments. It's like every muscle in between every fiber is connective tissue. Your entire structure is sort of imbued with this silica. So you have a stronger body if you take silica regularly.
Do you want to test the water? I mean, obviously we're not going to like Secaucus, New Jersey to the wetlands next to the airport taking out horsetail, but how important is it to test water before you do?
Before you harvest? I think you just really have to use your judgment. I mean, you can do a water test, but here's the thing. So there have been some really good studies on phytoremediation. My friend who I went to school with, Kate Kennan, wrote the phytoremediation book that's out right now. It's called Phyto. And I've had a couple of conversations with her. Basically, the things that are most damaging to us are things like lead. And we actually plants don't actually take lead up in a way that we can then be harmed by it. The way you would get lead poisoning is if you were harvesting on poorly retained soil, it was dusty, and you breathed in the dust. Or if you took a carrot root out of very, very highly leaded soil and ate it without rinsing the actual soil off of the carrot. So we don't actually get the really damaging toxic heavy metals from things like herbs that are grown. They just don't actually take it up in that way. So you're pretty safe, not every case, but unless you see rusty water coming into use your judgment. Your gut has amazing ability to tell you what is going to be safe. And you can always go the more scientific route and test the water and look at it that way, or even test the plant sample. You can send that to Logan Labs and they'll tell you exactly what's in there. I tend to not worry too much about it. I think the health benefits are better, and also because my whole shtick is to get out and really engage with plants and bring them into your life. I think it's much better to do that and to learn and see them in where they're growing than to be scared and not and buy them from wherever. Okay, so the next one I want to talk about is prairies or uplands. You guys are going to know a lot of these plants. Herbalists use a lot of plants from prairies. I'm just going to touch on a few. Let's talk about what we know about prairies. What happens in a prairie? What's the habitat like?
Lots of sun exposure.
Tons of sun, long growing season, very arid.
Really deep soil.
Can be very deep soil, right? Fire, very open. Wind, very windy, so very arid. So there's a lot of transpiration. The biomass is constantly, getting wind blown across it, and there's not a lot of moisture. And prairies don't get a lot of moisture, especially in our ecosystem in the United States. The mountains push the air up, all the water falls right on that side of the mountains, and then it goes across the plain very dry, very low humidity. So fires tend to be a big issue. So what plants that are prairie plants do is they put a lot of energy into their root infrastructure. So they can regenerate very quickly after a fire. If you've ever seen a prairie fire and you go to that place a month later, there's tons of little seedlings already this high. And within 2 months, you may not know that there had been a fire. The grasses won't be as high as they were before the fire, but you won't be seeing any bare soil. So the roots, and if you think about a lot of the herbal medicine that we get from prairie plants, we actually use the root as the medicine. They're usually fibrous roots. Some of them are tap roots. This is a tap root. This is a thistle root that I pulled in April. It had only been growing for 3 weeks. That's a hori knife, so about 8 inches. So a 15-inch root in 3 weeks. They can grow so quickly and mine very deep in the soil.
Where was that, Amy?
Where was this growing? In near my home in Lincoln, Mass. Yeah. So there's lots of different types of. I could do a whole lecture on root architecture, and it's awesome. There's so many cool things about roots, but just know that the prairie plants tend to have roots that we use a lot of. So some star herbs here, right? We've got echinacea, New Jersey tea, monarda or sweet leaf or bee balm, gentian, ironweed, and blue vervain. So what do all of these have in common? They all do slightly different things in the body, and you might say, well, this is a bit of a stretch. But I think the thing to remember is that the roots are very, very, for all of these plants, they're dealing with kind of the upper digestive system. And when you think about roots and what they're doing in a landscape, especially in deep soil, the soil is the gut of the plant, and the biota in the soil is like our microbiome. So any minerals that are in the soil are not getting digested by the plant. They're getting pre-digested by the fungi and the other microbes that are in the soil. And the plant is sending sugars into the soil and saying, bring me cobalt. And the microbes are like, let's get cobalt, we'll get more sugar. And there's this very symbiotic relationship and this communication that's going on at a chemical level. And so I think for all of these plants, we use the root. We use them for slightly different things. Yeah.
What are you using the bee balm root for?
So that's in the mint family. The bee balm is a Native American remedy. Lots for colds and fevers. The root, yeah. I mean, the whole plant is used. The aerial part is more used of the sweet leaf, but the root too is used, and it was more used by Native Americans than it is now, and more for acute problems like colds and fever, where we use the mint family in general as a nervine and cooling and calming plants.
How about its aerial parts being used?
Yeah. It was used for cholera too, the root, and for right after childbirth to nourish. So a lot of these plants, aiding digestion, aiding the nourishment of the body so that it can quickly recover after something drastic, like a wildfire or like a big disease. If you kind of get the sort of gestalt of it, I think it can be helpful.
Do you think oats are a fairy plant, or?
One of the plants that I don't show here, but is a grass, is big blue stem. And all of the grasses tend to have these very fibrous roots. And, milky oats is very specific because we use it for especially for women, moistening and keeping, the fluids moving appropriately. But we don't use a lot of grasses for things other than perfumery, and we don't tend to use them in herbalism. We use corn and wheat and oats as foods, and milky oats we'll use herbally, but there's not a big history of using the grass roots either herbally, and I'm not really sure why that is. That would be a fun thing to kind of delve into. I don't really know how much time I have left, but I don't think it's very much. I think 15 minutes, okay. So let's talk about woodlands. What's common about woodlands or forested areas? Shady. Moister. Awesome. A lot of biomass circulation, right? Tons of leaves drop. Yeah, decomposition. A lot of mushrooms, you find them in the woodlands, right? So there's a lot to chew on there. There's a lot to decompose. There's a lot of digestion happening in a woodland. So we have a lot of this kind of habitat here in New England. One of the things that's really cool about woodlands is we have these native the spring ephemerals they're called. These are plants that come out very early before the canopy leaves out, and they'll complete their entire life cycle. So they'll put their leaves out, and they'll be very flat, open, kind of hand-like leaves to gather as much sun as they can, before the canopy comes out. And some of them even retain those leaves after the canopy comes out. And they need to be big and flat to get as much sunlight as they can. They'll leaf out, they'll flower, they'll get pollinated, and they'll set seed within like 2 months. And so they have a very quick kind of rate of reproduction. So I think there's one of the things about woodlands is we're losing a lot of them. So there, a lot of the plants that like woodlands that are, I said that some plants are generalists. Like a lot of the urban plants I talked about, they'll kind of grow anywhere. A lot of the plants that are growing in woodlands now are endangered or threatened, or they're just more rare, and we tend to be more careful with them as herbalists because of that. So like American ginseng there on the top left, which is an adaptogen. So, when I think about forests, I often think about them, this plant in particular will only grow in certain aspects, so southern slope that's very protected and very quiet, undisturbed. Those are the places that you would go to regenerate and to, kind of get back to yourself. And yeah, this plant is really good for that. It's also an incredibly great plant for moisture retention. So like, if you're like really, really thirsty all summer and you can't seem to manage that, this plant, which grows in woodlands, is very good at allaying thirst. Speaking of thirsty, does anybody have any questions at this point? So the other three plants on this slide are gold thread, which refers to coptis, which refers to the root, golden seal, the name also refers to the root, and Oregon grape root. So all three of these plants are share the constituent berberine. Does anybody know what berberine is? Okay, so B-E-R-I-N-E. Thank you. So berberine is this really awesome, valuable constituent that, there are many other things in these plants, but just to isolate this one, golden flavonoid. It is specific to the mucous membranes, and what it does is it helps the mucous membranes manage the moisture. So it moistens them and helps them, not just moistens, but it actually helps them work better and transfer moisture better. So
For specifically for moistures, like in the body, what is it?
only the mucous membranes.
Oh, mucus.
So like, we have our skin and that wraps inside and goes inside our sinuses and down the esophagus and the whole interior of the gut and the lining of the gut and all the way out the anal sphincter. All of that is the mucus membranes of the body. Those are the things that touch everything that comes in first. The mucous membranes have the very first histamine reaction, the very first allergic reaction. They're very, very fast turnover. They've got to, the lining of our stomach does not get enough nutrition from the blood supply to do the rate of turnover that it does, six days or something. The only way that it gets the nutrition that it needs is by digesting very quickly, using the microbiome, short-chain fatty acids coming from plants into quick nutrition for those cells. So if we're going to be optimally healthy, then we have to be eating plant matter with short-chain fatty acids, green leafy vegetables, every day, in order to keep that really working properly and healthy. Okay, so I don't want to spend too long on that, but just a couple more. So I want to talk about these sweet birch here, that's the bud, and in fall, and wintergreen, those top kind of left corner plants. These also have salicylic acid, but the reason why I'm bringing them up here in this habitat is they treat, so salicylic acid is used to treat pain associated with inflammation, right? So it brings down inflammation. You would use something like birch and wintergreen for a deeper, more chronic inflammatory pain like rheumatoid arthritis. Whereas you would use willow or meadowsweet or the spirea for something like a headache or a sports injury.
What did you say those were?
The ones I talked about earlier, the meadowsweet or spirea, which has the salicylic acid in it, and the white willow bark, those are used in a different way. And I, the pattern, as I look at general patterns and kind of how to think about these things, what I'm seeing is that totally makes sense with where these grow. In a woodland, in a deeper situation, you need a deeper kind of healing. So that's kind of how I remember these. There's also a couple of other plants on this slide, partridge berry. Yeah.
So what would be the application, let's say if you're using it, it would be internal? Or it would be
There's so much more. I definitely would love to get into that, but we both of these we would probably use the essential oil in like a salve or something like that. But the main point is that they don't derive salicylic acid from these in a lab. We would use these herbally, and the other buffering constituents are going to help with these deeper issues. So Pipsissewa and blue cohosh, these plants are also woodland plants that are specifically used in labor and childbirth. So they help manage fluids and that process and help a woman spring back more quickly from that. So kind of like thinking about the themes, the idea that you need cooling and anti-stress and deep healing. Those are kind of the themes with these plants coming from a woodland.
So what are the names, the last two?
Pipsissewa, these two, and blue cohosh. And this is in the spring. It comes out looking like this.
Can you spell Pipsis?
Sure. I'm gonna look at my notes though. M-I-S-S-I-S-S. Okay, so the last one, I'll do this quickly. The alpine or mountain. So what do we know about alpine situations? Super UV damage, right? Like super windy, short growing season, cold, cold, cold. What do we do when it's cold and windy and like harsh? You're right, you become more compact. You sort of hide. There's this great German word called Krummholz. Krumm means bent or crooked or twisted, and Holz is wood. And plants that are growing in an alpine situation tend to, you'll see that. You write Krummholz in Google. It's so amazing with these spruce trees, like normally 80-foot trees, and they're like 3 feet and they're bent over like this, This is the theme here is really like concentration. So some very typical alpine plants that we use a lot of are Arnica montana, which we use homeopathically because it's so strong. It causes a lot of gastric upset if it's taken internally. So it's used in like oils and salves externally in small doses because it's so strong. Monkshood, aconitum, again, very, very strong, not a beginner herb for cardiac issues. Mugwort, another, absinthium. This is the Artemisia absinthium that absinthe is made out of. Psychotropic effects, very concentrated. Especially, some of these plants you can grow. Like I grow this in my garden. I've grown that in my garden. That one, they can grow other places, but when they're grown in an alpine environment, it's kind of like a terroir effect. It's like they're much stronger. They are different when they grow in this environment than if they're grown in rich garden soil. They're even more concentrated. They're already a concentrated plant, and they will still share some of that concentration, even in a garden, but they're even stronger. So like this spikenard, which I have some of these I can pass around. This one's really strong to smell. You can smell how concentrated that is. That is, difficult to extract. You get it from the rhizome right before the leaves unfurl. They'll go in between all the rocks and take the roots out from between the rocks. There's very little soil in an alpine environment, and steam distilled to get the essential oil. And it's very fragrant, like it's in the valerian family, very strong. Spikenard. Spikenard. Spikenard.
Okay.
Spikenard. Yeah, Nardostachys. So the themes there are just like super concentrated, tough plants that are, not really beginner plants. They're not safe and easy to use and grow everywhere. They're a little bit more tricky. So, and a lot of these are vermifuges too. So you got to be really strong in order to be able to deal with a parasite or a worm. So vermifuges tend to be really concentrated.
And where it's applicable? Where it's applicable when you use it, like for what are remedies?
Well, like mugwort as a vermifuge, you would take it internally to deal with like a tapeworm or something, yeah, for the gastric system. There's many ways to use all of these. So basically this is not very applied. This is more of a framework or a way of thinking to help with assimilation. It's just, it's, you know, if it works for you, it's great. And if it doesn't work for you, then don't use it. Like it's really about collating information in a way that's memorable. And, you know, if I've helped you like delve deeper or, you know, made you feel more excited about any one of these plants, then I would feel like I had succeeded, because for me, it's about engagement. And it's about saying, oh, how cool, that plant lives in that environment. I'm going to go find it. I'm going to go see what it really is doing out there and how it, and then I'm going to harvest it, take it back to my kitchen, my medicine cabinet, my plate, and really engage with it and start to learn in that way. And that's really what I'm after. Like, you know, the whole buying herbs online thing, I don't think that's where we get our real journey or passage with herbs. I think the direct engagement and, you know, you have to give something, you have to make an effort to get that, to get the knowledge back. And there's so many signs, there's so many ways and languages that they're talking to us. And I think it's really just about going out there and be present to that. And there's no possible way you can't be changed in doing that.
So like domesticating it, you know, taking plants from the wild and growing in your backyard.
Bringing it, yeah, you can grow it. That growing plants is a great way to get to know them. I grew clary sage this year, and I was like, what a cool plant. I never really knew, you know. So give me your questions. I do want to say, if any of you want support in bringing plants more fully into your lifestyle, I have to skip this part of my talk because I don't have time. But I have a website, www.ecologicalherbalist.com. There's nothing sold there. There's no pop-ups. There's no, like, it's totally informational. It's like recipes and, you know, plant profiles and just stuff I think of when I finally get it up there. There's gardening tips. But I do think that, you know, if you take this on, it does require some support. So please join me here, and I'm happy to take your emails.
How about the cactus and aloe vera? Like, what's the, you know, character of that? Do you know where they are grown and very?
Aloe vera is chemically very different from
How about
the Acorus.
yeah, the cactus, which is like doesn't need much water and it's grown very, you know, warm.
In a desert environment.
So what's the character of that too?
You know, when we take cactus, if we use cactus as a food, it's very cooling. And that's what it's doing for itself in this harsh desert environment. That would be my go-to, like just, you know, using your intuition and your just basic knowledge. I mean, there's probably many other things about that we could say, but, you know, this is meant to be like a really rudimentary kind of scaffolding or matrix that you can peg information to as you gather and as you become more proficient as an herbalist. So
what herbs did you use to cure yourself from Lyme disease? I'm curious.
Japanese knotweed,
Oh, wow.
teasel.
Solely Japanese.
No, those were big though.
Yeah.
Those were big. I took formulas. The biggest thing with Lyme was really lifestyle change, but I won't talk about that since your question is really about herbs.
Right.
So in order to trick the spirochete, you know, it's constantly changing the body. It has 3 forms. So it'll insist if it feels threatened by like antibiotics, and it will become a spirochete, and it will drill through cartilage and muscle to get food in the other forms. And so you want to trick it. You want to constantly be hitting it with something different. So if you take one broad spectrum antibiotic for 3 weeks, in the first week it's just going to insist and wait until you're run down and, you know, your mom dies or whatever. You're really stressed out and run down again, and it will come back out. So, you know, with Lyme or hepatitis or anything like that, once you have that, it's always with you. It's in, you know, you're just dealing with it. So with Lyme, when you're treating it with herbs, you want to, you know, go a week on some formula and then add in another formula and then switch the formula to a third formula and then go on a break and then start again with a different, maybe the second formula, do that one first, and then, so it's like this matrix, it's like Excel spreadsheet. Okay, start with Lyme support, then go to Spiro Plus, and then, and it was a lot of tracking and keeping track of what was I supposed to take today, and did I take it? I had this little like, check, I took it, because I couldn't even remember anything. Yeah, there were a lot of different things in those compounds, and I would recommend Stephen Herod Booner's book, or just working with a Lyme herbalist. There are several now. A Lyme, yes, proficient practitioner.
So, I'm sorry, if I understood, then you use more than one plant, or
More than one plant, yeah, formulas. 3 different formulas, yeah. And then I also use teasel and Japanese knotweed separately.
How do you personally make the determination of when you would use herbal treatments versus like medical, clinical treatments? Or do you ever use medical treatments?
This is this piece of like owning your path that it's hard. Like right now I'm dealing with another health issue. I have a fibroid, and it's gotten very big, and I've talked with several herbalists about it, and they're very hard to get rid of once they've gotten to a certain size without doing surgery. And I'm like, no, I'm really against it. And yet that may be the best option at this point. So I think that the thing is to really gather information and ask a lot of people and feel, really sit with it and feel what is going to be right for you. One of my teachers, had throat cancer and chose not to do chemo but did radiation. And there's just so many different ways to heal yourself. And we're hearing about, sound healing. And there's just so many. There's Rife machines for Lyme. There's Epsom salt baths. There's a combination of therapies. There's those oxygen machines, super oxygenate. There's so many different therapies and ways of healing that it's not one size fits all. And in fact, Lyme is not. You get someone's like, oh, I have Lyme. It's like, well, which Lyme? With what co-infections, and how is it really affecting you, your constitution? But I truly believe that the body is vital and is meant to be alive and wants to be alive and will do everything it can to be as healthy as it can. And we just need to support it in giving it the right. We need a full spectrum of phytochemicals every day. We need a lot of plant. We don't culturally, we just don't eat enough plant material. And we get a lot from that, and health-wise. And I think also, we tend to be kind of sedentary, and that's not good for us. So, these are all things you've heard a million times today. I don't need to. But I think it is a very personal thing, and I think the key is to just grab that and say, this is mine, and I'm not going to farm that out to someone else. I'm actually going to ask and feel out this information and get many opinions and really research it and figure out what is going to be best for me. And there's lots of considerations. There's budgetary considerations. What can you actually afford? How much time can you spend in the kitchen cooking for yourself? There are some real things. And if just getting more sleep is going to give you a higher quality, then do that. Anyway.
Anything off the top of your head you would recommend that's safe during pregnancy and good, positive to do during pregnancy?
Herbs?
Yeah.
Oh, so many. Yeah, red raspberry leaf is great for tonification. You're like, I got that one. This silica-based, this equisetum, to throw that in your tea. Rose is lovely. The Rosa rugosa. The red clover blossom. Any of the lymph cleansers. Cleaver, this spring you can take cleaver juice. I think of all the native ones that are growing around me. Sometimes these are not the ones that you can find in the store, but alfalfa, growing all the vetches.
Clover.
Yeah, the clover is so nice, so gentle.
I feel embarrassed to ask because of the quality of herbs that you're talking about. You're saying don't buy online. I do buy some herbs.
It's totally fine.
Whole Foods at Herb Farm.
Mm.
In the little tinctures.
Yeah, I was gonna share this mugwort one with you actually, just so you could feel the strength of it on the tongue. It's very.
So they're vile.
They're awful. I mean, in terms of compliance, no. But the quality's good. I think this is a good company. I think they're conscientious. I don't think they're, you've probably read about the FDA certification issues that a lot of small herb companies are having right now. I don't know if they are, and I don't really care if they are. I think it's a big problem for herbalists. Herb farm. Gaia, we used to grow herbs on my farm for Gaia. Now they grow all their own herbs to be standardized so they can be FDA compliant. And they do a great job. They're a phenomenal company. Rick is a great guy, and they know what they're doing. And they are very standardized, so you're getting the same thing. So like when you're gathering and making your own medicine in your kitchen, it's not going to be standardized. But it's going to be from your terroir. There's that word again. It's going to be from your place, growing in the same place you are, and gathered by you with your intention imbued in it when you make that medicine. So to me, there's a lot there. There's like way more than placebo effect going on there, even if it's maybe a little bit less strong, or maybe even a little more strong, or maybe you made it with rum instead of vodka so that you would like to take it, like you added honey or something so that you could give it to your kids. Those are all things that really make the medicine yours. And yeah, go ahead.
Parasites. Somebody asked me, what are the best herbs for parasites from smaller parasites?
Black walnut,
Yeah, and
mugwort, or artemisia. Paudarco, yeah. Some people don't react very well to that one. And that one's one that you must buy. It's not available around here. But other supports for the body like slippery elm and things that will help the gut heal so that the parasites aren't finding these crevices and places to hide. Anything you can do to support the entire gastric system. And there's so many great herbs for that, right? And foods, great, just really great foods for that. Staying away from any of the, if you have known allergens, wheat or corn or eggs or milk, dairy or something, absolutely resolving to stay away from those while you're getting rid of the parasites. So you don't have any histamine reaction and opening of the pores. So that your gut is nice and tight and astringed and toned and like able to handle the power of some of these antithelmintics to deal with those.
So if someone had leaky gut, you'd have to first close up.
You need to deal with that. That's part of this is part of the reason why someone has gotten a parasite to the level that it's causing health issue. Our bodies are meant to, a parasite comes in, it gets killed. If you're healthy. So yeah, you have to buoy the whole system.
Do you recommend anything specifically good for Candida?
Candida, the first thing I would do is change how you eat for that. Yeah, or how one eats. And I think I think that also is one of those things that is kind of like this a little bit faddish, like a little bit like, oh, everybody has Candida, and unless you're really having complications that you're certain are connected to that, it could be dealt with by, better sleep, better diet, exercise. And you would see all the symptoms of the fatigue and many of the other issues that come with Candida go away. Women, even healthy women, will have, maybe one day of their cycle, like maybe a couple days before getting the period, that they'll be like, oh no, I have a yeast infection again. But it won't be a full-blown one. It will pass with the period, and that's just a hormonal imbalance with the Candida. And that also will go away if you're super strict. But life is also worth living, and like, who wants to give up their chocolate, right? Like, you may just be able to live with that one day of.
There isn't any herbs or anything?
Yeah, totally. Paudarco is used extensively for that. And caprylic acid is another one that you can buy, in capsules. Paudarco. But I don't recommend that for everybody. If you tend to be dry, and some people don't react well, try it. See, Pau, P-A-U, next word, D''ARCO. It's a bark of a tree. It makes a really nice tea. It's a lovely tea. But it's caprylic acid, yeah.
Thank you.
Those are really effective, really quick. Like, get rid of the yeast if you have a yeast infection, as a result of Candida. But I would say the way to deal with Candida is not to use an herb as a pill to get rid of it. I would really take a look at the overall body and the lifestyle of the person who has that overgrowth and try to get them back in balance in a more holistic way, and help with the things that really support health. Basic things like sleeping and loving and eating. And
could you clarify about the histamine reaction, what's happening, what causes what?
when I was talking about the gut, this is a whole course, but I'll be quick. So the gut lining the mucous membranes is particularly in the gut. If you eat a food that you're allergic to, the very first response that your body has is in the gut. And you'll have inflammation there, and it sends a signal out to everywhere else in the body to protect. So there's these tags, like antigen tags, and you'll get the rheumatoid arthritis more, and you'll have all these aches and stuff if you're eating a food constantly that you're allergic to. So food allergens are really big in dealing with any kind of histamine reaction. If you're really interested in this, look up Paul Bergner. He's a medical herbalist, has a wonderful school and a journal, and he has a course that talks about this in depth, and it's prescriptive. So you'll go through the course and you'll actually have a toolbox at the end for supporting someone on a food elimination diet and helping them, understand how to make a tea for themselves, and it's a tool set for dealing with something like that.
B-E-R-G-N-E-R?
Yeah.
B-E-R-G?
B-E-R-G-N-E-R. Paul Bergner. That's it. Thank you. That was so great. Thanks for your questions. And please stay.